What's going on, everybody? My name is Jeremy, and on my best days, I get to be the lead pastor here at Cornerstone. And on my worst days, whole different conversation. You will want communion elements. We will go straight into communion from the worship, or from the sermon this morning, in response to what the Lord is doing. So if you need those elements, our ushers can get them to you. Jamarcus, anybody need communion elements today? Let those guys come through and drop that off. We are in the middle, if you're new with us, we're in the middle of 40 days of goodness. This last week has been a lot of fun. We had Minnesota Teen and Adult Challenge through last Sunday as part of that goodness experience. Thank you to those of you who have responded in terms of being mentors. Several of you have talked to me about that. That is a huge, huge opportunity. And it's one of those things where, like, you enter into it, I think sometimes to go, I'm going to help somebody, and you will be surprised at how much impact it actually puts into your soul. So that is good. We have these guides, 40 Days of Goodness, if anybody's going along with that. They are outside the welcome booth. Would love you to pick that up as part of that. Yesterday, we went to Feed My Starving Children. Repped out with close to 100 persons from Cornerstone. We packed, John, are you in the room? Jamarcus, was it 50-something thousand bags or something like that? Isn't that crazy? Was such a great day to be a part of that. That food goes all over the world to help people in some of the most desperate places. We have one more thing we want to invite you to, though, when it comes to 40 Days of Goodness, and this is for all of you who like to play bingo or just to do good. This is 40 Days of Goodness bingo. What we would like for you to do is grab a bingo card on your way out today. Make one good bingo. Yes, I've been to the bingo parlor. I've heard that phrase before. Make one good bingo. Bring it back to church. Take your picture. We would love to have these back by Palm Sunday. Imagine acts of goodness being the way we recognize the King who's coming. Instead of laying down palm leaves, what if this was our act of welcoming Jesus into worship? There is one on here. I thought it was funny. We put these out on Wednesday night at our all hands, all ages, all stages goodness encounter night on Wednesday. And one of them says, let someone merge in traffic. To which one of the kids said, Pastor Jeremy, I can't drive. And I said, then your parents will have to do that. My daddy doesn't drive that way. So you can't plan that kind of comedy. But 40 Days of Goodness is there. We'd love you to be a part of it. Grab the goodness bingo. Turn it into your act of worshiping and welcoming Jesus. We start a new series today called Soulignment. How do I experience faith beyond guilt, shame, and burden? We live in a time when one of the buzzwords around Christian faith is deconstruction. Anybody hear that word, deconstruction, about Christian faith? We're going to get there. Deconstruction essentially means that people who have walked with Jesus, or at least have gone to church for some time, have decided that there's something wrong with the Christian faith, and rather than help reform it, they walk away from it. We see this happen across Christian celebrity, which may be an oxymoron on its own, but that's what we see. We see it among young people. We see it among older people. We see it among the burnout, the disillusioned, and the remindedly destitute. I can never, ever be good enough, so I might as well walk away from this thing. And we end up with phrases like de-churched, unchurched, and rechurched. And it really gets down to this tension of what do I do with faith? What does it look like? How can I live into this? And one of the things I would tell you is if we were to pursue Jesus at his level, if we were to listen to his words over and over and over, Jesus tells us that he's come to do something new, and he's come to give life. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. Let me set this in context. In John chapter 10, Jesus is teaching. If we were to kind of set the tone for where Jesus is in this particular encounter, Jesus has just healed a blind man. Nothing new for Jesus. He's healed people on many occasions. This man was born blind, and his eyes were opened. Jesus did something that no one had seen done for this man. The problem with Jesus is he healed the man on the Sabbath day. And this creates the tension. Because to heal someone on the Sabbath is work, and you're not supposed to work on the Sabbath. And the conversation begins to happen. Is it better to heal than not heal? Would we withhold good from someone because our law says to withhold good, to not work? But Jesus healed the man. The religious leaders were furious with this man. They called him a liar. They start to interview him. Tell us what happened. Well, this happened, and now I can see. I don't know what happened, but I once was blind. You've heard this line before, right? I once was blind, but now I see. So they bring his parents in. Tell us what happened. We don't know, because they were afraid of the religious leaders. He's old enough. Have him tell you the story again. He didn't change his story. Instead of receiving the miracle, they threw him out. Jesus heard that they had thrown the man out, and he goes to find the blind man. This is the end of chapter 9. And Jesus goes to the man who was blind, and he says, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" One of Jesus' favorite titles for himself. And the formerly blind man says, "Who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" And Jesus says, "You have seen him. In fact, he's the one speaking with you now." He says, "I believe, Lord," and he falls down and he worships. "I have come into this world for judgment, in order that those who do not see will see, and those who do see will become blind." And some of the Pharisees who were near Jesus, when he heard these things, says, "We aren't blind too, are we?" And Jesus says, "If you were blind, you wouldn't have sin. But now that you say we see, your sin remains." And then he continues, "Truly I tell you, anyone who doesn't enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in some other way, is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens it for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought all of his own outside, he goes ahead of them. The sheep follow him because they know his voice. They never follow a stranger. Instead, they run away because they don't know the voice of the stranger." Jesus gave this as a figure of speech that they did not understand. And so he says, "Truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who come before me are thieves and robbers, and the sheep doesn't listen to them. I am the gate. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will come in and go out and find pasture. A thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come so they may have life and have it to the full." Most of the time when we read this passage, we attribute this particular thief to a particular supernatural being that we call Satan. You've heard that before, some of you? That the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy? We anchor that on to Satan. Jesus doesn't do that here. Jesus actually anchors the thief who comes to kill, steal, and destroy to religious tradition. Do you catch that? The whole context of the passage. There's a man who he healed. The religious leaders of the day demanded more. despised Jesus because he did good on the Sabbath day, the day that God calls very good, but they were so reserve it and hold on to it, do nothing on the Sabbath, even good for your neighbor. They question the man, they question his parents, they throw the man out. Jesus reenacts or reconnects with that man, affirms that man's faith, and then Jesus begins to explain. And he uses this beautiful illustration of the sheepfold to help us understand. Now, the farm that I grew up on, we had pens that we kept animals in. So that may be kind of the same thing. We had free-range chickens. We cooped them up in the evening time, keep the foxes and the coyotes and such out. The sheepfold would be a rock wall that was almost a full rectangle, save for one opening. And instead of having a gate, the gatekeeper would put his own body in that gap, so that any outside thing that would try to get to the sheep would have to go through him. The sheep would be protected by the gatekeeper of the sheepfold. Jesus says he's the gate for the sheep. All who enter into me can come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. And in the context of the passage, Jesus is talking directly to the religious leaders of his day. We come into a space where we talk about faith, and we talk about life in Christ, and we talk about what does it mean to experience life to the full. And a lot of times what keeps us from experiencing the abundant life isn't rebellion. Rebellion is what we were before we said yes to Jesus. Romans says it so clearly, while we were still God's enemies, Christ died for us. Oftentimes, what keeps us from experiencing the life that Jesus invites us to is buried under baggage. The things that we bring to say yes to Jesus are often the very things that keep us from experiencing the fullness of Jesus. And that becomes a problem. So how do we live into that? Right? Like if following Jesus feels heavier than the world you left behind to follow him, something's gone sideways. Jesus says, I've come to set you free. I've come to give you life. I've come to restore and renew. And he lays all this out. And if following Jesus feels heavier than the world you left behind, something's gone sideways. Sometimes that something that's gone sideways is just us. I don't need a religious tradition to turn me sideways. You know what I'm saying? Like I carry enough within myself that I don't need anybody else's guilt, shame, or burden to keep me from experiencing faith, to keep me from experiencing life. But us religious types do a good job of adding on to it, don't we? So I have to ask the questions. So if Jesus has come to give life, as we start this series, everything we want to talk about from this point forward is going to be about experiencing the life Jesus has for us. To get to that life, we have to understand what stands in its way. What's keeping us from experiencing the life Jesus has for us? One of those is guilt. Now, guilt in and of itself is not the enemy. Guilt does some very good things. But guilt's role in our lives, guilt's role is to be a messenger, not a landlord. Does that make sense? We can feel guilty, and it should tell us something, but guilt was never meant to stop and stay. It can visit the address. It was never meant to own it. But what happens for us a lot of times is we let guilt set up camp and own the spot. So we live guilty. Guilt is an obscuring force. And when it loses its effect, when it loses its exit, grace loses its effect. When guilt doesn't have an exit, the beautiful thing, like we are on a journey to Easter right now, we're in that Lenten period, the cross tells us that guilt has a landing place. There is a place for guilt. It does tell us about some things in life. It does push us closer to Jesus, but it was never intended to stay. Healthy guilt is a gift. It's like a nerve ending that tells us when something's gone wrong. It's intended to move us to right, though. When guilt takes up residence, and it loses its purpose, it keeps us from experiencing life. Things like confession become ritual rather than release. Repentance becomes a performance rather than a return. And we miss grace altogether. Guilt is part of conviction, but it's not the whole part. And again, when guilt loses its exit, remember the cross is guilt's exit. When guilt loses its exit, grace loses its effect. There's shame. The difference between guilt and shame could be as easy as this. If guilt says I've done something wrong, shame says I am wrong. It becomes an identifier. Shame says I am wrong. It causes us to hide. And hidden people can't live free. You ever play hide and go seek? I don't know about you. I'm not very good at that game. There's not a lot of places I can hide. I like to play hide and go seek so long as we're playing in the dark with no flashlights, because I might find a really dark corner and you'll just walk right by me. One of my favorite hiding spots of all time is I hid the coat rack. And I just held the coats and put a hat on my head. People walked by in the dark. They didn't even pay attention. Then they realized that thing's much fatter than our normal coat rack. And so I got caught. Some people are really, really good at hide and go seek. Really, really good at hide and go seek. So good that they can win the game because they've never been found and the other players have to say something. You know what they say? Ollie, ollie, all come free. And then the person can come out, ha-ha, I won, I'm out of hiding, I'm free. Shame says don't come out of hiding. Stay. If people knew the real you, they would be disgusted. Hide. Thomas Merton reflected on shame and talked about shame removing human dignity because it forced someone who was intended to live free to be bound and hide. And a lot of us, Sunday in and Sunday out, this chair in and that chair out, this sermon in and that sermon out, we still hide because of shame. But the gospel doesn't call us to despise ourselves. It calls us to die to the false self so that we can live into our truest identity, which is beloved. Shame doesn't just condemn behavior. It works to rename your soul. And Jesus has already given you a name, beloved. Shame gets heavier than guilt because it's not anchored or tethered to a particular event or action. It actually becomes part of the behavior. We struggle with this with our kids all the time. My kids will say things like, I'm just a bad kid. No, you're a kid who did a bad thing. Like, it doesn't exchange the thing. I can do something bad. I can make mistakes. And shame would tell me I am the mistake. But Jesus doesn't. Jesus comes to set us free. Shame is one of those things. We weren't made to hide. We were made for relationship with Christ. And then there's burden. Like, we don't often think about burden as a problem that we live into. It's actually one of those things that we carry as a reward. Look at all the things that I'm doing. Look at all that I deserve or have earned. Haven't I done enough yet? And when you carry burden, guess what? There's never enough. I was talking with a missionary this week, and the missionary was talking about all these conversations they have to have. They're new to the mission field, and all these conversations they got to have with people like me to convince us that they're worth the money that we give them. Isn't that crazy? I'm like, wouldn't it be great if your church called you and said, hey, we value the work you're doing. You don't have to come home and prove to us that you deserve this money. Instead, why don't we send you on vacation somewhere so you can get some rest? Wouldn't that be awesome? I love Wendy, love her family. I love the work she's doing. She doesn't have to prove that work to me. That's not the purpose. That's not the point of what we did today. It was to generate some interest and some awareness, not to prove that she's worth it. God already invited her to the table before she did anything. The missionary I talked to this week, God already prepared the spot for her at the table. She doesn't have to prove herself. Neither do you. But we do, sometimes because of guilt and shame. I had a young man I used to work with. His name was Stephen. Stephen was a senior in high school when I first met him, and I was in youth ministry in this particular church. I inherited their tradition. It was my first 4 or 5 months there, and they had senior testimony night where all the high school seniors would tell everybody from 11th grade down to 6th grade their journey with Jesus and why their life was so good at 18 years old because of Jesus. They could now move into adulthood. Our childhood testimonies are important, by the way. Jesus meets us at every life stage. Stephen was 18 years old. He had no crash and burn. There was no promiscuity. He wasn't chasing girls everywhere. He wasn't doing drugs. He was a good kid. Stephen was a good kid. Top of his class, graduated with honors, all-state basketball player, engineering scholarships. He was just a good kid. And we sat there, and he's like, I can't give a testimony. I don't have anything to say. And he looked me right in the eyes. I've never been as bad as you've been. Fair. Check that box. That's bragging rights right there. I don't brag about the stuff I've done because I brag about Jesus and what he's done for me. But Stephen sat there. He didn't know what to say. And I listened to him talk, and a couple of weeks go by, and he finally realizes, Stephen finally realizes that his testimony is about what God had already provided. He had a mom and a dad who loved him like crazy. And they were dedicated to their faith. And from the moment Stephen drew breath, they taught him the name of Jesus. They didn't just drag him to church. They lived it every single day. And church was a part of that rhythm. And Stephen began to own the graciousness of God and the faithfulness of God as his testimony. That doesn't mean because I didn't grow up in that same household that God wasn't faithful and gracious to me. It's a different experience. But we will prove ourselves as to why we deserve what God tells us clearly we could never earn. Why do we keep trying to earn it? Like the one who created the universe tells us we can't earn it. It is a gift. But we keep trying to tell God why we deserve it. Why? And then we live under the burden of that. And when you carry that burden, that crushes you. Did God give you that burden, or is he trying to free you from it? It's worth asking. So we get into these spaces where guilt and shame and burden keep us from experiencing the full life that Jesus promises. And instead of living into the full life, we start to inhabit shadows. And when we inhabit these shadows, like we echo what Jesus said, the thief came to kill, steal, and destroy. Remember, he's not talking about the devil right there. In direct context of what Jesus is talking about, it's all the weight and the heaviness that we put on each other. In particular, this was about religious tradition. We can attribute this same identity to Satan, who does want to destroy you. Those things are said in other passages, but when you look at the thief passage, this thing that comes to take life from you, to sap it from you, it really gets down to what Jesus is arguing against. And in that moment, it's the Pharisees. And all the extra law they had added onto the people that kept them from experiencing God, that increased guilt, shame, and burden, and they never saw what life with Jesus could look like. The tension with lies that happen when we start to believe those kinds of things, lies don't stay in your head, they move into your habits. It would be one thing, like if I had a lie I believed about myself and could just kind of set it here, like, you know, like the Daffy Duck, Donald Duck cartoons where they had two things on the shoulder. Like if the lie could just stay here and just whisper, that's one thing. But eventually, the lie will move into my habits. And that creates a problem. So these lies move into my habits, and what I believe in secret eventually becomes how I live in public. And that is not the abundant life. So the shadows that we can inhabit: pride. I protect myself by staying self-sufficient. I'm not able to move past sin, guilt, or shame, guilt, and burden. So pride becomes one of these echo patterns or these shadows that I give my life to. Indifference. I survive by not feeling too much. I just won't care. Indifference. Probably the most opposite word towards love in all of human language. We often think love and hate are the opposites of coin. No, love and hate both care, right? Hate doesn't feel like care, but hate cares about something. Indifference cares about nothing. I survive by not feeling too much. Striving, I grasp for control because surrender feels like losing. Yet Jesus says the one who loses his life for my sake will gain everything. Jesus says, unless you deny yourself, you can't be my disciple. And we will work and we will strive because anything else feels like losing. If I don't deserve it, if I can't earn it, I can't receive it. And we live in the shadow. Restlessness. I keep moving because stillness exposes emptiness. I was talking with a guy the other day, and he's like, man, I hate slowing down. Why? Because when I slow down, I got to face everything. They did a study on men who used to fall asleep in church. And they found out it wasn't because the sermon was boring. The psychology behind it was the first time in a given week that a man was able to slow his body and brain down enough. The first time he was still in 6 days was sitting in church, and he would doze off in the middle of the service. This is almost the opposite. We add more, we do more, we add more, we do more, we add more, we do more, because if I get still long enough, it may expose maybe a lot of doubt. I really don't believe that Jesus is who he said he was. It exposes the guilt, it exposes the shame, and so we're restless. We just keep moving. Judgment. I use criticism to keep others at a safe distance, including God and his church. If I can criticize it enough, I can stay at a safe distance, and that person or that thing can't hurt me. So I'm going to use my critical words, my judgment, to keep people or things away, including things that are good for me. Judgment. Duplicity. I show different versions of myself to different people. Jesus calls us to single-mindedness. If we were to best translate the word hypocrite from the ancient language, the best translation to get would be double-mindedness. I think one way and I think another, and it depends on who I present it to, right? Like I was telling someone the other day, I said the easiest thing to do, this is a young leader who wants to be in ministry. I said the easiest thing to do if you really want to succeed in ministry is be the same person on Sunday that you are on Tuesday, right? It will rub people the wrong way sometimes because they don't like your Tuesday self. It just happens. But if you try to be someone different on Sunday than you are on Tuesday, you will exhaust yourself every single time. And you'll be good for nothing. Just be the same person. Don't be double-minded. That's true for any of us, right? Not just the people who are on the platform, but for any of us who call Jesus King. That's true for us. Be the same person you are on Sunday that you are on Tuesday. And if you're a rotten person on Tuesday, well, we got some work to do. But that's part of grace and the shaping of what Jesus is doing. Can I enter into that life and find something more? Duplicity. Peacekeeping. This one gets tricky, okay? Peacekeeping. It sounds good, but I avoid conflict at all cost of truth, goodness, and righteousness. It's easier for me to keep the peace. I don't want to stir the pot, so I'm going to keep the peace even though I am going to exchange goodness, truth, and righteousness for the payment of peace. We're not actually living in the truth, goodness, and righteousness. We're just going to keep everybody quiet. Happened during George Floyd. I saw it all over the place. Pray for peace. What we really meant was pray for quiet. I saw it 3 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago. Pray for peace. And what we really mean is quiet. Just keep everybody calm. We don't want to rattle the cages and shake people up. Let's not do this. It makes me uncomfortable. And for the sake of quiet, we sacrifice truth, goodness, and righteousness. Peacekeeping. Withdrawal, I disappear before I can be rejected. Rather than living into the sheepfold, I withdraw and hide in the wilderness. I disappear before I can be rejected, even though Jesus has already fully accepted me, just as I am. But I withdraw. And when we come into those things, we lose life. They are shadows that we inhabit, mostly driven by shame, guilt, and burden, and that keep us from life. But Jesus gives life. He says it so plainly, you shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. He would echo it a little bit later, and whom the Son has set free is free indeed. Soulignment is about living into the life that Jesus came to give. It's about realigning my life to him, not to guilt, not to shame, not to burden. So we talk about the shadows today because much like Adam looking at the animals of the garden, he had to name them to have dominion over them. Or if you want to put it short, he had to name it to tame it. And when we can see the shadows that most often hinder us, if we can name them, then I can begin to pursue the life that Jesus invites me to. And they have no more control over me. So we start here. It's a good place to start. Jesus, the gatefold, the one whom we enter into, we find life. We're going to